SQL Server 2022 is cloud connected, and there's a lot of ways why. Learn more in this episode of Data Exposed. Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed. Today, we are joined once again by Bob Ward, and we're continuing our SQL Server 2022 series. I hope you're following along. In this one, we're going to talk about cloud connected. So what is that?
Yeah, and a great suggestion for us to go right to cloud connected. In fact, remember our wheel of power?
Okay.
The wheel of power. We're going to start at the top of the wheel with cloud connected. Let's dive in what that really means.
Yeah, let's take a look.
SQL Server's had hybrid capabilities for a while, but kind of basic. Now we're going to connect to managed instance to do things like disaster recovery. We're going to connect to Synapse for near real-time analytics. We're going to connect to Purview for things like policy management. We're going to connect to Azure Active Directory for things like multi-factor authentication. And we're always connected to Defender to help look at things like assessments and alerts. The engine is baked in to know this functionality, but we need some helpers like Azure Arc Agents and the extension for SQL Server, or the self-hosted runtime to use things like Synapse. But we're going to use things like distributed availability groups baked into the engine to support things like managed instance. So Anna, what I'd like to do is kind of dive into more what some of this actually looks like, maybe even a demo today.
Yeah, some architectures, a demo.
Architectures,
let's do it.
demos, yeah, let's do it, right? Let's talk with managed instance. And I always like to talk about challenges. Saxo Bank's one that we know very well that's faced this challenge. Ola, right? Ola works for them. And he's looked at this technology and told us, hey, setting up and maintaining a DR site is not trivial. SQL Server has all the capabilities you need to do this, but you have to manage the DR site. How about use the power of managed instance now to do online failovers in the cloud? And of course, managed instance is managed by Microsoft, so that DR site's always just going to be there when you need it. And so what we're providing now, to start with for general availability, is the ability to easily connect a SQL Server to managed instance using distributed availability groups. We have wizards and SSMS to set this up for you. And then, if you have a disaster, you can online fail over to MI.
Wow.
And if necessary, in general availability, you can offline do a disaster restore back to SQL Server. But also, you may have seen us make this announcement. We have a new preview experience for an online failover and failback.
Okay.
Kind of like a switch role type scenario. So I'm excited to see that eventually land for general availability. And look on this screen here. One of the neatest things about this is we're proud to announce that what's coming is if you declare your managed instance site as a disaster recovery site, the SQL license is free. Free, just like we do today for Azure Virtual Machine. So one of the things I wanted to show you, though, is this idea of doing an offline DR. Because a lot of people have asked me, how can you restore back from managed instance if it's versionless to SQL Server? Let's look at it. So starting with today with managed instance, all the managed instances are now compatible at a database version level with SQL Server 2022. So it's aligned with this release. So what you can do is you could stop your write workload in managed instance if you're going to go back to SQL Server. You could do a copy-only backup of MI into Azure. Then you could do a restore of backup into SQL Server. And notice here, the database version numbers are aligned between the releases, which is pretty cool. Now, of course, if you wanted to keep going here, you would migrate your instance objects, redirect your app. You can even reestablish this link back. One of the things that people have asked us about this, though, is if you're going to make this compatible, how do you get new versions or features in MI?
Right.
As long as we build features in MI that are not changing the database version, we can continue to iterate on MI, even in this model here. So pretty excited to see this land. A lot of customers pretty excited about it as well. You can do these restores even if you're not using it for DR purposes. If you just want to restore MI database back to SQL Server for, say, some sort of compliance reason or something.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is MI Link, one of the big features of this huge cloud-connected concept. So would you like to see it?
Oh, yeah, we'd love to see it.
Let's see it in action here. So what I've got here is I've got a SQL Server setup here, SQL 2022. And in Management Studio here, I'm also actually connected to Managed Instance itself. So you see here, I've got my connection to SQL 2022. I've used the Wide World Importers sample database as a way to kind of show off this functionality. So let's see a little bit more about how this works. So in Wide World Importers here, what I'll show you here is the ability to use SSMS to use this wizard we talked about to replicate and synchronize to Managed Instance. So I've got all my prereqs set up. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pick the Wide World Importers database. I've backed it up already. Now I need to sign into Azure, and I've kind of shortcutted some of those steps a little bit. I need to pick the target MI that I want to replicate to. So I've got an MI already deployed. This is now compatible with SQL 2022. I'll do that. And then here's where, behind the scenes, SSMS is going to set up an AG and a DAG. Even I don't even already have one, I can do that. I know. I don't even have one, it's building for me, or I can connect to an existing one. When I do this and run this finish button right here, what it's going to do, it's going to seed my database to managed instance and set up the availability group and DAG. I kind of time-lapse that a little bit, but you can see now in SSMS, my database in SQL 2022 is synchronized to Azure.
I see.
And an AG and a DAG are already set up for me automatically. And you can see the database is online and now available inside MI. Now I want to show you though how you can tell where are you in terms of who's primary, who's secondary. So using these queries here, I can tell that I'm on a SQL server on my primary, and I know that because it's read-write. And here I'm showing you the database version that's compatible to go back and forth with these with MI and SQL Server. And on the right over here, I'm using a similar query to show, hey, I'm on MI right now. It's read-only, which is my secondary, and the versions are actually compatible. So now that you see this in action here, what I want to show you is some changes. Like I'd like to make changes to my database, and I've extended wide world importers to create a vehicles table and a stock items table, kind of like a cargo system, right?
Okay.
So I'll create these tables locally on SQL Server. And what I'll do is I'll also do some population of data. So these are the DDL of the schema I'm going to create in SQL Server. And then what I'm going to do, I picked Texas cities to do my
Surprise. It is Dallas.
It is Project Dallas, right?
Yeah.
Dallas is actually listed on there, right? So I'll go ahead on SQL Server, create my tables, populate some data. And then because I've got an AG set up, I can easily go in and tell, hey, on my MI system, is the data synchronized? This is like a cargo count query, right? You can see here, I'm connecting here to MI. I'll run the query. I've got one, cargo, one for each city in Texas for my different vehicles. Well, now that I've done this, I'd kind of like to see if I can fail over to MI. So I'm going to use the same SSMS wizard to check failover database. In this particular case, we're going to kind of switch for MI to be now our primary. So I've signed into Azure as well. I've got this already signed in. And I'm going to go ahead and pick a planned failover, which means I'm stopping my workload on my primary. I could do a forced one if SQL Server wasn't running. And I'll go ahead and clean up the AG and DAG that SSMS has already set up, because I just want to move over to MI and be able to restore back later. So in the wizard, when I hit finish here, what it's going to do is going to make the AG and DAG synchronous, ensure that our changes have been synchronized, and then we'll see MI has become our primary. So let me finish here. This script is finished. So what I should be able to do is go over and run some of the same scripts I did before to see the status. You can see here now, I'm going to connect to MI, and notice it's now become the read-write, which is now my primary. I've successfully failed over online to managed instance, of course. So I want to show you that offline capability to kind of restore back. So what I've done is I've already copied over a backup from MI into Azure. So let me show you what it's going to look like to restore this into SQL Server. So you notice at the top up here, this is SQL. Oh, I know. Sorry, I forgot I wanted to show you this first because to show you the version compatibility. This is SQL 19 at the bottom right here. I've got that set up first. So I'm going to try to restore that copy-only backup into 19 first. Notice it failed. And it failed because of a version compatibility. You see it right here. That's what people have seen before. That's because the database version in MI is higher than the version in SQL 19, all the metadata and storage structures in the system. And so the other thing I can show you is by doing a restore header only from the backup, you can see the version is baked into the header of the backup. That's how SQL Server knows this version's not compatible.
Got it.
So for SQL 2022, it's the same. Let's go try it there. So I'll take that same backup I got in Azure Storage, and I've created a new version of the database because I've already got wide world importers on my SQL Server. And I'll wait a few seconds here after the restore, and there you go. It's all restored. So
from MI to
back to SQL Server because of the compatibility that exists. So that's just kind of a brief demo of how I've replicated, failed over, and restored a backup back to SQL Server.
Okay, wow, this is pretty cool. So love to see this. Love to see this link capability for managed instance. But there's other cloud-connected stuff, right?
There are. And in actual, the next part of this is Synapse, right? For near real-time analytics. Atrium's a company that uses analytics a lot.
Okay.
They'd love to use Synapse. It's expensive, though, to create ETL jobs, copy that data. It's out of date. It's stale.
Sure.
We have something called Synapse Link for SQL, where we're going to allow you to seed data directly into Synapse SQL pools. SQL Server will monitor log changes at that point and automatically feed those changes into Synapse near real time. Let me show you a little bit architecturally how that works. You know I like architecture diagrams.
Hyper-focusedness.
Hyper-focusedness, yeah, exactly. So on the left side here, imagine this is your SQL Server with a database on premises, Azure being that divider here. So you'll first set up a Synapse workspace. Then you'll go in and create what's called SQL dedicated pools in Synapse. You can do all this from the Synapse Azure portal or through PowerShell. Then you'll create something called a link service for SQL. This is the ability for you to tell what is my SQL server I'm going to actually connect to. We will build what's called a control plane in Synapse where we're going to be able to ingest data. We'll also allow you to set up the self-hosted runtime anywhere on your network that can talk to SQL Server. This is why it's supported for Linux too, because even though that program is a Windows program, it just has to know how to connect to SQL somewhere in your network. So that's your link service. Then you build something called a landing zone. This is an Azure storage account where we're going to store data temporarily before it goes in Synapse. You also create a link service for it. Now, at this point, Anna, nothing's really happening. You just set yourself up for success as a one-time operation. Then you create what's called a link connection. A link connection tells the hosted runtime, hey, can you go tell SQL Server there's some data you need to synchronize based on tables that were selected. You do that from Synapse Studio. And we'll take Parquet files and take it from SQL tables as a snapshot and feed it in the landing zone. The ingestion service picks it up from the landing zone itself, these Parquet files, and turns it into actual create tables and dedicated pools and synchronizes the data, which is great. So now you've got this all set up and you're synchronized to start with. But we said you're going to do near real-time changes. How does that work? Well, as you make changes in SQL Server, just like a technology like change data capture, it's not the exact feature, we'll monitor for committed log changes in the server. We'll put them in a queue that we have in memory, and we'll feed other types of files into that landing zone. The ingestion service understands where those are. It takes those files, turns those as incremental changes as inserts, updates, and deletes, feeds those directly into Synapse dedicated pools. So that's kind of how the overall system works. And of course, if you're Patrick LeBlanc or Adam Saxton, you can build a Power BI report on top of it as well, because you're in Synapse, right? But it's a pretty impressive architecture. There's a little bit of setup to get done, but once you do that, the system just works on its own.
Pretty amazing.
There's more. There's more. There's security, right? There's AAD authentication. There's Purview and Defender. People know Defender already as a technology. So let's talk about AAD and Purview. Those are new capabilities for SQL 2022. So what companies have wanted is an alternative way to authenticate versus just SQL and Windows domain authentication. And AAD provides that. You know, you can use Azure RBAC to set this up. It's going to support things like multi-factor authentication. It uses that Azure extension we talked about. Remember the Azure Arc Agent, an Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server. You can do logins based on AD accounts, or Anna, you can do users without logins, just like you can do in Azure. We even support link servers as well. So the way this works is that the Azure extension will take data from Azure, put it in the Windows registry. That way, when somebody logs in with Azure Active Directory, we can go look at the registry to know how do we connect and authenticate to AD itself. So it's a pretty seamless system where the Azure extension is giving metadata for SQL Server to know how to connect to AD and authenticate. And don't forget, SQL Server and Azure VM also supports this now in public preview. Now, the other part of the story is Purview access policies. Let's say you don't want to grant specific logins access into SQL Server. You want to go to a central place like Purview to give somebody read rights, modifies coming soon, or performance monitoring rights. Things you want to do outside of SQL, the SQL Server engine has been enhanced to understand these policies and automatically apply them to the system. And the beauty of this technology is this: I can apply this across 50 SQL servers in one place. So that is both AAD access and Purview. It's a pretty powerful story from a security perspective. Anna, I just flew through so much stuff that SQL Server is truly a hybrid data platform. Managed disaster recovery with Managed Instance. Near real-time analytics with Synapse. New security concepts with things like Azure Active Directory and Central Governance with Purview. All built into SQL Server, all part of SQL Server 2022.
Wow, this is a lot, but it really tells the story of how SQL Server 2022 is cloud connected. So Bob, thanks so much for joining us on the second episode of the series. There's lots more to come, so be sure to keep tuning in for this series. For our viewers, if you like this episode, go ahead, give it a like, leave us a comment, and let us know what you think of these cloud connected capabilities. And check out the links in the description to learn more. We hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.